All right, I think we're good.
Okay, I think this may be the last segment for the day, but we thought we might cover we'll explain how we got here in a second, but the false equivalency of quote-unquote cancel culture versus actual censorship by, well, in this case, we're mostly talking about the right wing, but by the government. And this came up because a friend of mine had a post, and I looked in the comments and then responded to somebody there and made my own post talking about how, in my opinion, cancel culture isn't really a thing, partly because it's not being done from the top down. It's this idea that people are putting pressure on society, which that's not canceling anything. Right there, that is not actually canceling anything. But what they are trying to change is basically they're just trying to make people act a little bit nicer, just tell a little bit more of the truth, that things like that. So it's not like we're trying to shove bad ideas down anybody's throats, apart from which we're not actually shoving anything, and we're not the government.
Right, and I think there's a lot of things to unravel here, and like first and foremost, certain aspects and parts of society deserve canceling. Racism, slavery, misogyny, bigotry, homophobia, transphobia. What's wrong with calling this out and saying we're not going to tolerate that when we see it?
Yeah.
What's the problem with that? That's cancel culture. Yeah, we canceled slavery, didn't we? Women have the right to vote now. These are things we canceled in the past. So if that's what you're talking, like certain ideas. Look, and we saw that. I saw this video and I shared it with Al. This kid brought up a really good point. Like, you don't have heroin at the farmer's market for a good reason. It's fucking bad for you. Like, these ideas and these thoughts, when they come onto these talk shows or wherever else, and people like get heat for talking shit and just being, in some cases it's not overtly and they're called out on it, and sometimes the waters can get a little muddy there, admittedly. But in most cases, if you dive deep into it, there's some racism behind it, there's some bigotry, and it's being called out, and they're saying they're being canceled. When in fact they're not being held responsible for crazy shit that they're saying. And at this point, has anybody really been canceled? No, it's just more like you can get on any soapbox and talk crap. Look at me. We're talking crap anywhere we want. And if you want to call this crap, go right ahead. No one's canceling you, buddy. You just can't go on a show and talk crap and think you can get away with it. And then people just say, well, I'm just not going to listen to that, or I'm not going to have you on my show. Yeah, you're not going to have a guy come to university and talk about a flat earth when you're talking about maybe, you get my point. You're just not going to have lunacy and give it equal airtime or equal validity or equal anything when it's just nonsense. And what they're doing is equating nonsense to something that makes sense. And it's a false equivalency. And anybody who tries to say, well, it's done on both sides, in my opinion, doesn't understand the difference between abuse and reactive abuse, which is what this is in the end of the day, which is somebody abuses you, right? And you react to that and you say you're not going to tolerate it. You're not the abuser. You're not the one. There's a false equivalency there. And, and what'll happen is on the other end, they do something what's called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victimhood offender, or victim offender, or victimhood offender, meaning they get upset for you calling them out for upsetting you, and then they try to reverse it and make you the problem. And it's very insidious, it's very cruel, and it's something a narcissist does, just like the conversation.
It's narcissistic.
It's mental warfare, it's psychological abuse, and it's done all the time, especially by Republicans and the far right. They constantly DARVO, and a lot of times it's projections. It's any accusation they make is usually a projection or a confession, and in their twisted, inverted reality to protect their sense of self. Because anytime you say something that's going to make them think and cause some cognitive disassociation or what they call cognitive dissonance, they're going to get mad at you for what they're feeling inside of themselves, because they know subconsciously that what you're saying is true. So yeah, then they're going to project this or start calling this cancel culture and all this other nonsense, when actually they're the ones canceling culture. And you were going to go into about this book thing.
Oh yeah, I've got a cousin who's got a 17-year-old kid in high school, and she's having to fill out a permission slip so that he can check out George Orwell from the school library. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, first of all, there shouldn't have to be a permission to check out anything from the school library. How does that make sense? But hypothetically, let's just say there is. How should that apply to anybody, high school or older? I mean, that for any book. I can't think of any book where that makes any sense.
Now, this is here in Texas.
This is here in Texas,
Right.
up near Dallas. Yes.
Now, when I grew up in and this is up north, suburbs of Chicago, and in the 70s, I remember school. I mean, we had even in early before high school, middle school, we had social studies, we had art programs, we had all these things, and it was it's by today's standards extremely progressive, I would imagine, and by Texas standards, like we're just radical left wing Sesame Street watching hippies, but it was like, this is like, and this is coming from an extremely white suburb that my dad had moved us into when we were kids out of the city. And a lot of these people were Republicans. When Reagan came around, they voted for him, and so this wasn't like, we had not reached this extreme level of far right fascism that we were at today. This is coming right after nearly, let's see, from the 1930s into the 1970s. Expansion of social programs, expansion of the middle class, expansion of rights and equal rights, and the new society with LBJ and all these other things that were happening, and the backlash then occurred with Reagan, of course. So education. But anyways, back to the discussion at hand. When I was in high school, I was in my, even early on, I think in sophomore year, we already had read, like, I believe it was my sophomore year in literature class, we had already read that muckraker book about the Upton Sinclair, The Jungle.
Yeah.
We had read The Jungle, that talked about the abuses in the cattle industry and all that kind of stuff that Teddy Roosevelt put a clamp down on. He was the first, he was the second of the two presidents who were progressive in this country. One being Abraham Lincoln, and second one being Teddy Roosevelt, who took on this establishment, and the status quo of these, at that point, capitalist, oligarchical, rulers, the new feudal lords of the new America. And, so there was a big long period of time that, from, the 1930s into the 60s. Well, anyways, this was at the tail end of all that, and we read these books. We read, Brave New World. We read Orwell, 1984. We read Camus. We read Sartre. We read The Stranger. We read, what else No Exit. We read, what other books can I read?
Catcher in the Rye?
We didn't read Catcher in the Rye. I did read that in high school.
Catch-22?
Catch-22 I read later. It wasn't in high school. But my point being is, we read these books and they were discussed, in an adult way. And I was even recommended books like Malcolm X, the biography of Malcolm X. I was 2 or 3 books on American Indian, one called Black Elk Speaks, about Wounded Knee Massacre. Another book. But anyways, this was not, there was suggested reading some of them, these books that were a little deeper, like the American Indian tragedy and genocide, but the other ones were just required reading, literally required reading. And today...
Well, and one that I read, and I had like a free period, and I think it was my senior year, where I could just go, and I'd usually hang out in the library. I can't even say the name of the book because the app that I'm luckily to post this on could take it down if I say the name of the book. But it's the book that the Mustache Man wrote.
Yeah, so I read that book.
You know what
too.
I'm saying?
I got that at the library.
And I didn't even check it out. It's like I'd pull it from the shelves and read a chapter or two, and then put it back, and then kept reading and reading. But the point is, you should have access to things like that. Maybe not when you're in elementary school, I mean, whatever, but as adults, as high school students or whatever, you should have access to those things so that you can see how stupid they are in some cases, or how good they are in the case of the things that
Right.
Steve was talking about. But I'm not advocating that that's something people should support, but you should have access to it so that you can dissect it for what it is.
Right. Well, I think if anything is a research tool, I'm not saying that you should be like reading Mein Kampf in like middle school or high school. The brain might not be developed. But as far as like a normal library, if somebody needs to reference that for a piece or something, yeah, of course, anything should be accessed because we need it as a historical data, as like what went down here. But for the madness, for the craziness of it. So that it's documented, well documented, and we know what happened, what his thoughts were. You can't legitimize it in any way and like bring it into a class and make it present it in that regard. But I think I get your point though. Like this stuff should be available. If anything, some of this stuff should be taught. This revision of history and this whole idea of, well, let's get past it. Well, that's what an abuser says. Punches a hole in the wall and says, oh, let's forget about the hole in the wall. Oh, aren't you over that? Why are you being so sensitive? Can't you get over that? When the wounds haven't even healed and you're still inflicting more. Like, no, we're not over that yet. We're not done with that yet. So, anyways, yes. So, censorship. Not happening.
Well,
I mean, like it is on one side. But
it is happening.
The other part is just calling it out.
Case in point, this whole nonsense of what's it, the Gulf of Mexico being called the Gulf of America.
Who gives him the authority to call anything anything?
Well, yeah, but then what's again funny in quotes. They used that and the fact that the AP refused to acknowledge the changeover as a reason to kick the AP out of the presidential press conferences.
Right, it's retaliation.
Yeah.
It's literally retaliation. That's how they're like children. It's like dealing with 8-year-olds when you're dealing with these people. Narcissistically, emotional, intelligence-wise, education-wise. I mean, we had that discussion before about how the vast majority of people, or a good half of this country, doesn't read above a middle school level. So, yeah, how do you have a rational discussion with somebody who's emotionally mature, narcissistic, and uneducated and can't read? Like, yeah, what do you do? That's a good way to sum it up.
It's $1 million question because that's where we're at. So, yeah.
Yeah. And they think they're smart. That's the word. That's Dunning-Kruger effect.
Right. Where literally the less you know, the more likely you are to think that you know more than you know.
Right.
And I've always found the best proof of that is if you look at people who are actually really good at something, they tend to be extremely humble in terms of how they talk about their craft. Not always. Sometimes you get big egos and whatever, but by and large, a lot of the great musicians, painters, whatever, who are really like nobody will question. Yeah, these guys are really good.
Some are egomaniacs.
Yeah, some are. But
Picasso,
by and
Dali,
large, a lot of them, they have nothing but good words to say for even people who aren't that good that they walk up to, because I mean they're humbled by knowing how difficult it is what they've had to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Once again, that's painting a broad brush.
Well, right, again, not 100%, maybe not even 90%, but like I'd say over 80%. I mean,
possibly.
Yeah.
I guess the point being is generally the more you know, the more you don't know.
The more that you know that you don't know.
You recognize that you don't know.
Vice versa.
And that's not to be mistaken, once again, for having confidence. And the difference between confidence and arrogance, the way I separate, and I think most people would, is arrogance is thinking you know it all and that there's no other better way, and you won't listen to other people, and you won't even take it into consideration, and you won't even listen and then say, oh, wait a minute, that is better. Your ego gets in the way.
But I would
confidence
generally comes from knowledge and experience, and arrogance.
Well, let me just continue.
Okay, sorry.
Confidence is knowing that you have experience, and you're willing to work with others, and you're willing to take and say you're wrong when you're wrong, and to be like, oh, wait a minute. Using my logic and everything else that got me to this point to where I'm really good at this, I'm using that same process to say that's a better idea, and saying, you know what, your idea is better than mine. The confidence is we'll get this job done. The confidence is we can do this. The confidence is we can be really good at this even. It can be accomplished, whatever it is. I don't care what it is, right? But you're willing to admit mistakes. You're willing to listen to others, and you're willing to work as a team, and you're not saying it's all about you. You're not saying like Trump would say, like, I single-handedly did, or Musk, I did this. You did nothing. Nobody's a self-made man. I ran a marathon. Who went out and ran it? Me. But yeah, who did all the other things that facilitated my ability to be able to do that? Everybody around me, my girl, like everyone. Like,
Yeah.
I could not have done it alone. Nobody can do anything alone. It'd be extremely arrogant of me to think for anyone to think that anything they do is completely on their own, except for maybe love yourself. But you get my point.
Right.
All right. So there we go. I think that'll wrap that up. Until next time.
So about 2 weeks from now, maybe.
Yeah. So probably 2 weeks from now, we'll come up with episode 3. I don't know how many parts we'll have. I'm sure a lot will go down. We're getting bombarded.
Between now and then.
Yeah, we're getting bombarded. I think it's partially on purpose. No, not partially.
No, it's largely
on purpose. Just it's another psychological warfare tactic that a narcissist uses on people to completely discombobulate them and send. But anyways, we can continue on with that discussion at another time. Bye.